We are honored to have with us Ms Suhasini Haidar. She's the Diplomatic Affairs Editor of the esteemed national daily, The Hindu. In today's interview, we'll be delving deep into her rich experience as a journalist in the field of foreign affairs, as well as discuss about recent happenings in the world. On behalf of Geostrata, we welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nikhitha.
Ma'am, let us get right into it. Ma'am, you've had extensive experience covering the most challenging stories and conflicts from all around the world, including from conflict-prone regions such as Kashmir, Pakistan, Syria, etc. Today, as we all know, we are living through times of massive geopolitical issues, be it the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the US-China tensions, the Taiwan crisis, etc. And media plays an indispensable role as the primary source of information for the common man regarding such conflicts. Ma'am, in this context, what do you think are the specific roles and ethical responsibilities that media should uphold while reporting international conflicts?
Well, thank you for that question, Nikhitha. It certainly is an important role, as you put out, because maybe 30, 40 years ago, a journalist's job had a very deep responsibility because they were the eyes and the ears of the average person around the world. They not only had to, they not only had to ensure that they got the story right, they also had to ensure really that they were covering the right stories, because nothing, in a sense, you didn't have in the same way the kind of live television we have now. The responsibilities today are much more about context and about a sort of balanced point of view. Because today it is possible to get a video from any end or corner of the world. If you don't have a television station there, or you don't have regular reporters based in a place, you will find citizen journalists. You will find someone uploading a video of what they've seen. You'll find someone going Facebook Live from something that they are showing. Now, for an international journalist, whether they are on the ground or whether they are at a desk and trying to interpret those issues, obviously it's better if they are on the ground because they can get a better perspective, but that's not always possible, particularly given the bottom lines, timelines these days that we see. The responsibility is much more about giving the reader, the viewer, the listener, a kind of context to the importance of the story. And also give, as much as possible, get data, get inputs, speak to journalists from the ground and from both sides of any conflict that are going on. Now, this has become, as I said, the biggest challenge. One of the things we are seeing is that governments worldwide have stopped regarding journalists as something that they should allow journalists freedom to go and cover a story as they would like. They either see the media as a kind of propaganda platform, or they see the media as something that should be cut out from access. I'll give you two examples. In the Russia-Ukraine war, you can see very clearly how journalists are allowed into areas by the Ukrainian government to show their side of the story, by the Russian government to show their side of the story, but they're not crossing those lines. There are very few journalists who have made the attempt. I think India Today's Geeta Mohan was one of those who made the attempt to go to both sides of the story in a sense, but you don't see that. The second example is what we have seen at the line of actual control between India and China, a military standoff since April 2020. Galwan saw killings of Indian soldiers, the first such casualties in 45 years. And yet, we have not seen journalists being given access to those areas, even close to the conflict, as we have in past conflicts. So they're not able to get the best picture. Journalists have to depend on secondary sources to cover what is a really, really important both military and diplomatic issue for India at present. So I think that is where the challenges now lie. It's not so much in getting people to see what's happening and getting these videos and people see one part of what's happening. It's putting all the pieces together, giving the story context, and as far as possible, being able to cover the story from both sides.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. That was very insightful to know. And to my next question, Ma'am, Taiwan crisis is in headlines all over the world, as you know. And talking about Taiwan, recent reports show that Chinese military drills around Taiwan are scaling down. However, the Taiwanese president was quick to remark that China's threat of force is undiminished. Considering these circumstances, what do you believe this particular crisis is headed towards? And are we likely to see an escalation of the tensions culminating in a Russia Ukraine model of crisis? Or do you think this conflict is dying down and losing its relevance?
Well, to begin with, I would say that making comparisons is always a bad idea because no two stories are the same, no two geographies are the same, no two histories are the same. So when you compare Russia and Ukraine with, say, China and Taiwan or any other conflict, one has to think really there isn't much in common. But where I think we do have to draw one lesson is not to take any outcome for granted. In the Russia-Ukraine situation, most countries, even though we did hear from the United States in the last 2 months saying Russia is going to invade, is going to bomb Kiev as well, the fact is most countries didn't think this was going to be the outcome. And the fact that 6 months later, we're still sitting there and there's still bombing going on, there's still no ceasefire. Everyone thought if it happens, it won't last more than a week or 10 days or so. So the first thing is, I don't think we should take any outcome for granted because these are different times. Just take a look at what we have seen in the last couple of weeks, although for the moment it seems there's stability, there is peace. We know that the Chinese exercises have now finished after being extended. We also understand that the United States is now planning maritime exercises in the region as well. So we don't know where, where the instability will come from and how quickly it will arise. Secondly, I would say that, that these are new times. This is not something that we have seen before. So we shouldn't be at all complacent about the fact that, okay, so they've worked their problems out for the moment, and now they might make some noise, there may be some rhetoric, but it's not going to be increased. The reason I say that is because see some of the things and look at how long it has been since we have seen this. The Nancy Pelosi visit, which China is using very freely as an almost an excuse for behaving badly, but the Nancy Pelosi visit is also something new. The US has not sent such a high-ranking official to the US, and although they said that she had gone on her own since 1997. At that time, it was the former Speaker Newt Gingrich who went to Taiwan, caused quite a lot of furor there. But he belonged to the opposition party, to the Republican Party. Here, it's the Democrat Party speaker. So it's hard to say that it's not connected. We're also seeing China's response has been like nothing we have seen in 25 years. Remember, as soon as Pelosi landed, there were military aircrafts going through the air defense zone. We saw that China conducted a military drill at 6 locations that dotted around Taiwan. People call these exercises for constraining Taiwan or for putting up a blockade. What China will do if it decides some kind of an invasion of Taiwan, that they will first surround Taiwan. So if that is the case, then these military drills must be taken much more seriously. They also saw the largest missile drill since 1997. 5 reached in the Japanese area as well. And then we saw the series of statements going out, which of course we have seen before. We've seen it, there's been 3 what are called Taiwan Strait crises. So there have been 3 already, and the question has always been, is there going to be a 4th? And was this the 4th? No, because we have not seen a China-Taiwan outbreak in violence at all, in this case yet. But it is possible. The last part I would say is that there is a Chinese Party Congress coming up in November this year. It is where Xi Jinping hopes to get the okay for a kind of no limits presidency of China. He is expected to try and look very strong, to have a very strong response on all issues. So there is that, if you like, wild card in the mix. There's also the possibility of a meeting that they're working on between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden, and maybe that works out some cessation of the tensions of the present. But we must also remember that these are different times in terms of what China has been doing, not just in the South China Sea. We saw it in Doklam, then we saw it at the LAC and the Indian frontier. So it really would be a very, very short-sighted idea to think that this is somehow not A, not going to affect us, and B, not going to reach the place that perhaps, as you said, the Russia-Ukraine crisis has reached. My final point would be that these days we are seeing takeovers of different kinds. One is a kind of all-out invasion, the kind we've seen, say, perhaps with Russia and its bombardment of Kiev. But we're also seeing insidious forms of creeping authoritarianism, of China's push with Hong Kong, for example, where you actually effect political change through force. Now, that place, China would be looking at places like Afghanistan, where the Taliban was able to take control of Kabul and take control of the country a year ago, despite the West saying, no, we will not allow this to happen by force. The West has put up with it, and now 15 countries, including India, have restarted their missions over there or have kept them open. So China would be looking there and saying, clearly there's no appetite for a pushback if this kind of force is used, which is not necessarily an all-out invasion, it's just done insidiously. The second place they will be looking at is Myanmar. In February last year, there was a coup by the military junta, and what the military did was not only to dismiss the government and to take military control of the country, they put the entire government, including a world-renowned Nobel Peace Laureate, Aung San Suu Kyi, into jail. They are threatening them with either life terms, 30, 40 years, or even death sentences. And really what the world has been able to do to stop this process is actually nothing. I mean, a few sanctions maybe, but even there, the world is not united in response. So I think if China is looking at what Russia has been able to do in Ukraine without the world uniting against Russia, what the Taliban has been able to do in Afghanistan without really bringing in any external intervention, and what the Myanmar junta has been able to do in Nikhitha, I think China may be sort of taking the wrong lessons from all of this.
Yes, definitely, ma'am. These are changing times and we should not take any outcome for granted. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Harsh to add on to the conversation.
Yes, ma'am. You also took up the point of how Xi Jinping's power is going to be expanded after this Communist Party meeting. And we have also seen that the Chinese have been more involved in the United Front work rather than only their work of military exercises and other part. They have been more successful in garnering, consensus through the United Front work and also putting up political pressures through their diaspora in various nations. How do you think that this United Front work is going to be expanded in coming years, and how is it going to be used in various areas to build up the influence of a new world order, especially led by China?
Thank you, Harsh. And that is a question that requires a really long study. But I saw that you referred to what's called the UFWD, the United Front Works Department of the Chinese Communist Party, which has become extra active in the last few years. We have seen delegations of the UFWD going to countries. Now, when we talk about India's challenges, we talk about mostly India's challenge at its continental frontiers. With China, we have a 3,500 kilometer boundary. With Pakistan, we have 2,000 plus kilometer boundary. And we have major challenges there, not to mention Afghanistan and the terror threat that could emanate from there. Then we speak about the challenges from China when it comes to our maritime front. So India has become more, if you like, mindful of its role in the Indian Ocean region, in Indo-Pacific as well. It has committed to carrying out joint patrolling exercises with countries in the Indo-Pacific, as well as part of the Quad with the US, Australia, and Japan. But the place that you are referring to, where we have seen the difference, and it's of course not just in South Asia, we're seeing in Southeast Asia, we're seeing in Africa, South America, is the kind of influence China is building, or the challenge that India faces from China's activities in the neighborhood in South Asia. And what we have seen is that there is, of course, what everyone talks about, the Belt and Road Initiative. Remember, except for India and Bhutan, every country in the neighborhood is a member of this Belt and Road Initiative, regardless of how far the projects have gotten or not. But they did not have the same issues that India did. They didn't unite with India in its boycott of the Belt and Road Initiative. The second part is where they are working on things like soft power. Now, COVID has actually put a real stop on a lot of this, because China shut its borders in such a almost draconian way, where they just closed everything down. And there was no question of going back to China. Students couldn't go back. People working couldn't go back and all that. So in that sense, COVID has put a stop on it. But pre-COVID, I can tell you, if you were to look at the figures, and there are studies, I think, done by the Brookings India Foundation, as well as by the Observer Research Foundation, that showed that if in 2005 or 2000, even 2010, India was ahead of China in terms of its relations with each of, and by that I'm not talking about Pakistan, because India's relations with Pakistan is another story, and China's relations with Pakistan is another story. But if you were just to look at India's relations with the Maldives, with Sri Lanka, with Bangladesh, and with Nepal, I don't count Bhutan because Bhutan has no relationship with China at present. So if you were just to look at these four, you would see that India was actually ahead when it came to things like bilateral trade, when it came to things like students from these countries traveling, when it came, when it came to investment, when it came to exchanges of tourists. So tourists, students, investment, trade, India was actually ahead in all of these countries. But if you look at closer figures from 2019, you could find the opposite has happened. That there are more Chinese tourists going to Sri Lanka, for example, in 2019 than there were Indian tourists. Or there were more students going from the Maldives to China, or from Bangladesh to China than they were coming to India. So there had been a reversal in this. A lot of this is, of course, because China offered these huge opportunities at the time, and India is much more strict about border controls, about allowing the neighborhood into India. But a lot of it was because of this work of the UFWD that was going from country to country and looking at how they could fit the needs of the country, even if they were short-term needs, in order to help them out. One last place I will say, where in COVID times as well, despite the fact that China has lost a lot of goodwill by closing its borders, not allowing students to come in and all the rest, the Chinese actually went quite consistently in the neighborhood to deal with, COVID supplies, give vaccines and all the rest. Now, we might say the Indian vaccine has proven to be better than the Chinese vaccine, but at the end of the day, the Chinese even gave vaccines to Bhutan, and Bhutan accepted them, something that hasn't happened in the past. They set up a South Asia sort of poverty alleviation center in China, which brought into a conference literally every Indian neighbor except Bhutan. And it has worked on, as I said, South Asian COVID aid in these times as well. So yes, that is a challenge. It's a challenge India has to face up to, but it is also, according to me, an important distinction that India should not look to be competing with China in areas where India's strengths are not. India's strengths in these areas that you have referred to are really our close bonds, the common language, the goodwill one feels about a democracy, the fact that we have so many different cultures and pluralism in India. These are all India's strengths. If we are going to try to match China dollar for dollar, we may not succeed. But if instead we try and work with countries, as we have now with the Maldives, if you ask me, with the Maldives, it has been, you tell us what you need. We will help you build that. And then we'll hand it over to you. As opposed to the Chinese model, which is to come and offer a lot of money and projects completed in a very short period of time, but projects that will over time impoverish the nation as it pays the debt back. Not all of these projects are bad. I'm just trying to say that there is a difference in the approach towards it. So in a sense, India has to be the un-China. It should not try to be China when it confronts this challenge.
Exactly, ma'am. Very well put up, that we have to fight where we have our events at our hand, but not the odds. Taking up from that only, ma'am, we have seen that there's a clash of these two ideologies or systems that happened during the Cold War also, but now we are coming up that again, that there is this talk of the Chinese democracy and the US model of democracy, these two ideas, and especially after the COVID, that the engineering that the COVID did of how the two systems are better or which particular system is better than the other, and the talk of it and how to spread it. How do you think, ma'am, that this new system that China has shown to the world, a new model, a rapid model, which is directly from top down, is going to change? Is it going to affect and influence the world or not? Or in the end, we will see again the West prevailing over these things through its softer power? And also within this, how India is going to play? How much do we have to move in accordance to the West to counter China or take their help in these particular areas?
So when it comes to democracy, you're quite right. What the Chinese spokesperson actually said is that democracy is not Coca-Cola that has a secret ingredient that only the United States can provide. And said essentially, look at us, we are a Chinese style of democracy. There's people's participation, is a party rule, and we have been able to provide equally good, if not better, services, and kind of more or less saying that the United States, by pulling out of Afghanistan, because the statement was made in the context of Afghanistan, had shown that it was actually a power in decline. So I would firstly challenge the idea that there are only two forms of democracy, this Western form and the Chinese form, because there are several others. I think democracy is something that comes from the grassroots. The demand for democracy very seldom comes from elites or power elites, people at the top. The demand for democracy actually comes right from the bottom up, because those are the people who are missing representation, who are missing the benefits of the state. And those are the people who really should be encouraged to come up in a democracy. I also think that the US makes a mistake when it claims to pit democracies against authoritarian regimes, if you like, democracies versus illiberal democracies, as they are called. When it tries to pit these, the debate around the world as this, then it has to remain consistent to that message. The question is, if the United States is saying that we are democracies versus the others, i.e. ideologies decide our relationships, then how do they explain partnerships with other countries in the Gulf, for example? Saudi Arabia is an example often given. We see the United States dealing with other countries that have authoritarian regimes or have illiberal democracies. And then, so the idea that you make it about a fight between US and China about democracy versus these regimes essentially has to be backed up then with a complete, you can't say that I will express this over here, but when it comes to Afghanistan, I will have a different role, and with Myanmar, I'll do something else. With China, Russia, I'll do something else. The second part of that is really to take a look at democracy as a whole system. It is not a system that just means you hold elections, because elections by themselves are not equal to democracy. Otherwise, they wouldn't use two different words for them. Democracy means much more. It means, firstly, that there is an election, that elected representatives rule the country, but that those representatives are responsible for a representation of the people, and representation of all the people, not just the people who voted for them. So in a sense, you can say somebody's been elected by a majority, and yes, of course, majority wins in this sense, but they have not been elected by the majority, so therefore the minority doesn't count. And I think that's where the greater questions are, that when we say democracy, or when China uses the word democracy, is it just a loose term that can mean anything? It just mean, oh, you have held elections, therefore you must be a democracy. It must mean much more. It must mean representation of the people. It must mean equality. It must mean transparency of your actions and accountability. After all, it's not that you win an election and therefore you can do whatever you want. You have won the election because you have proven, or you have the potential to prove, that you will do what the people want. When you go back for elections, again, the question must be, have you delivered this to your people, or should you be held accountable to it? We've got it upside down right now, and I don't blame any one country. I certainly see problems in Indian democracy as well, as we celebrate our 75th anniversary of independence, or the 76th year. But I think it's necessary to make these distinctions when we look at how democracy plays out as a term around the world. Finally, I would like to say that, when we see these systems of governance, the fact is there are so many countries that are moving one way. Some are moving from a democracy to an autocracy. Some are moving from autocracies to democracies. Some have been solidly democracies. You're quite right. The West has shown consistently, if you look at just the United States and Europe, they've shown consistently that they are committed to democratic standards, democratic values, and all the rest of that. India has also, with a few aberrations, committed itself to that. I think, what Mr. Biden said at one point is that one has to lead by the power of example, not the example of our power. Is very true. You were talking about soft power and all the rest earlier. And the fact is, your soft power does come from you being seen as a democratic power. There was one point in India, now people may not remember, when each of our neighbors was in some trouble or the other in terms of its democracy. So they had military rule in Pakistan and Bangladesh. You had a monarchy in Nepal. You had Sri Lanka going through the civil war and very, very, tough laws and martial law over there. And the truth was, even when they were not following democratic principles, they looked to India as a kind of beacon of hope, as a kind of aspirational story. We can't afford to lose that. If India stands for something in the world, it is not because it has this massive population that you can market a lot of goods to. It is essentially because it is democratic, it is pluralistic, it is secular, and it is inclusive. That means it ensures the representation of everyone in its polity, and we see our president as an example of that. President. So I think those are important things to remember, that if your soft power is coming from being a democratic country, it is because of all of these things. If we stop being all of these things, then perhaps we won't be a democracy either.
That was great, ma'am. Evenly put up. And through that, we will move on to Nikhitha, and she will be asking the concluding question.
Ma'am, I have a last question for you. Ma'am, as we all know, foreign affairs and the discourses surrounding it, even in popular media, have historically and largely been a male-dominated field. Even though recently we see an emergence of strong female voices in the field, as yourself, there is a lot more way till this gender gap in the field is bridged. So as a woman with long years of experience in the field, can you share with us our experiences and what structural changes should take place so that more female perspectives are factored into the discussions on IR?
So I think the problem with IR is very much what we see with journalism as well. In fact, there are as many women, if you ask me, as there are men in the field. But there tends to be a sense that authority comes only from men, which is why you will see international relations, the panel after panel will actually have only men. And sometimes when you tell them, could you not find even one woman, then they'll add one woman to it. Or the person who is the moderator will be asked, will be a woman. I don't think that is a genuinely, such a deep-seated kind of patriarchy that exists. I do think at some level people do what they have always been doing, and that's why things have not changed as much. I will say that actually when I look at the foreign policy sphere, reporting sphere in India, I see a lot more women than perhaps in other fields even, and certainly than a lot of the men. And it is a field that lends itself. I mean, you see so many women who go and cover conflicts. I mentioned Geeta, I mentioned, Smita Sharma, there's Nidhi Razdan, there's Barkha. There are so many people who travel the world and show you the stories from all these places. So I do think we have been blessed in that sense in the international relations sphere. I think the problem happens at the other end. For example, editors of newspapers, for example, management of think tanks. in these places, you don't see as many women as you see men in the boardrooms, in, as I said, the decision-making structures. You don't see as many. And I think that is something that we have to work towards to change and figure out why that is happening. After all, somebody gave me the statistics. I can't really prove it. It was an American statistic, strangely, that 60% of the journalism students at a certain point of time were women, but less than 40% of practicing journalists were women. And when you got to the higher ends, editor level and above, it was only about 20%. So we have to understand why it is happening that when a lot of women go into IR, a lot of women go into journalism, but a lot of women also go into IR, why they aren't being seen at the higher end or the more considered end of things. I do think that some amount of representational symbolism is a necessity. I often get asked, if you don't think there is a difference between women and men, then why are you insisting that there should be women on every panel? I think there has to be some representational symbolism, because it means that you aren't even trying to find a woman. You've just decided that all the authorities on all these issues are men. But there is also another concept that I am not so well versed on, but I have been reading a little bit about. It's called feminist foreign policy, FFP. And several countries around the world are now signing on to this idea that they will take the women's aspect in. After all, if in Afghanistan, the West had made it an absolute condition that unless you allow women back into the workspace, unless you allow women into colleges, unless you allow girl students into school, that is our basic minimum for allowing the Taliban to continue as a government, for giving them aid, for helping them with this, opening embassies and all of that. If they had made the feminine principle the most important, perhaps you would have seen a very different outcome. Instead, it was the other way around. More important to do all the other issues, the political resolution, the ceasefire, and all of that. So there are a lot more people considering the idea that they must take women along. Obviously, one doesn't strive for inequality by doing that, by making it all about women. What we're striving for is equality, and eventually all foreign policy is based on universal principles and not just on feminine or masculine principles.
Definitely, ma'am. There has always been a saying that the higher you go, the fewer women you find. So this is definitely a problem that we have to handle. And thank you, ma'am, for providing us with your valuable time. We got a very comprehensive view of an eclectic range of topics, ranging from your experiences as a female journalist, the roles and responsibilities of media, and also you discussed with us the nuances of a wide variety of topics such as Taiwan, the US and China, their democracy models, and the varied definitions of democracy in itself. Thank you so much for speaking up with us, ma'am.
Thank you, and thank you for your very thoughtful questions. It really made me think again before I could answer.